M. The Media Project.
Here it is. You're in for another Are We Here Yet podcast and Hauser's podcast, telling the stories of small-scale landlords and all kinds of property people here in the great state of Vermont. I am joined today by a good friend from the east side. We have an east side and a west side thing going on here in Vermont. My friend is Darren Sherburne of Four Seasons Sotheby's International Realty. He is the associate broker out of the Fairlee office. He's also a houser in a million and one other ways, in every way we can really think of a houser. Darren, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, of course. Happy to be here.
So we met recently because I was giving a presentation to the Bradford Housing Group up in the Upper Valley. For those listening in other parts of the country, not sure where we're talking about, just for context, we're talking about that little piece of Vermont as it starts to get thicker that meets with the Connecticut River and New Hampshire, and both sides are called the Upper Valley. So you got like Hanover and Lebanon, New Hampshire on the other side, and towns like Fairlee and Bradford and Thetford and so forth on the west side. Give us a little bit of context. What's your day like? What are the different roles that you play as far as being a houser out there? And then after that, we'll get into, just what the micro market is looking like up in the Upper Valley.
Absolutely. So on a normal day, I'm covering a lot of territory because I work in both Vermont and New Hampshire, which is what we endorse any licensee do in this territory. As a real estate broker and the associate broker of an office, I'm responsible for our licensees, and I don't oversee them in any way, but at the same time, we encourage them to be the best they can be. So a lot of that is, covering as much territory as you possibly can. And one of the beautiful benefits of being on a state border is you can work in two states pretty easily. And our communities are very synonymous. We have what we lovingly refer to as the sister towns as you go up and down in the Connecticut River Valley. So you have Fairlee and Orford, Bradford and Piermont, Newberry and Haverhill, and then Wells River and Woodsville. The funny thing is Wells River and Woodsville are both districts of the greater township that's south of them. So what you'll also see is you'll see the bouncing back and forth of commerce hubs. So a lot of what we're doing in a day-to-day basis in my territory is covering distance, because we have listings from, say, Orford, New Hampshire, up to Wells River, Vermont, and I'm going between them, showing them. I am primarily a real estate broker, and then I am a real estate developer and landlord as a branch of my business, which I'm very fortunate to be able to do. My business has a number of facets, and I focus on single-family homes and land, buying and selling, and then I do residential landlordship and development.
So like many people working a rural region, it's good to wear a number of different hats. I'm going to imagine that creates a little bit of stability overall in the work that you're doing.
Yes. A big part of our business is peaks and valleys. And something that I really enjoy about my landlordship is I have a bit more consistency, not only with rental payment schedule, but also with the maintenance, the doing of seasonal tasks. I really prefer to handle things in a bulk methods. So, when it's time to go cover all the AC boxes, or it's time to go make sure all the corners are properly, closed up or spray foamed. I enjoy having a crew of people that I also can say, hey, go do this to each property, which is much easier than, say, scatterbrains type mentality of here's a shotgun blast of this property needs everything.
And you got a culture. I totally get because prior to coming to the west side of the mountains and becoming a resident of Vermont, with a former partner and I, we were working the Connecticut River Valley and various sections of your just north of you, actually. So I know a little bit about the micro market there, but talk to our listeners a little bit about this is a region that shares culture. Are there any differences in the real estate market from one side of the river versus the other?
There are. A good rule of thumb is that when I'm pricing properties, I don't compare properties that are across the river, because the township that a property is within not only impacts its zoning, because it is town by town up here, it also impacts its taxing. So you'll see towns like Orford, great town, bit of a higher tax bracket, whereas you go north to, say, Reigate, Groton, other side of the river, totally different tax bracket. Experience-wise, living-wise, I would say that you have a lot of similarities, and you don't necessarily benefit more on one side of the river than the other. But things like New Hampshire not having taxation on cigarettes and alcohol inspires people who enjoy those substances to cross the river to shop. Other things like the attractiveness of the market basket in Plymouth, New Hampshire, bring people all the way from Reigate, Vermont to Plymouth to shop there because market basket is a pretty awesome offering. I went to Johnson Wales in Providence, Rhode Island, and spent time in Massachusetts, so I'm well aware of market baskets.
You gotta go to Artie DeMoulis's store because I have to admit, moving to Vermont, moving to the area of Rutland County, was not totally prepared for the increase in food prices, which we were like, oh, well, no problem. There's lots of local agriculture. There is, but guess what? Almost all of it's being sold south of the border in Massachusetts.
Yes.
Is that, wait a minute. Oh yeah, that relatively cheap but high-end local produce that we were buying either came from the Pioneer Valley of Massachusetts or it was coming from Vermont. And now it's like, oh, we don't have access to it. That made us sad. But,
No, we do run into, you have the benefit of a lot of farm stands up here. That's a big part of daily life. I also really encourage people can choose the way they want to live. If you'd like to be a hermit, you absolutely can be. If you'd like to be a social butterfly like myself, where you're part of a number of organizations and you give your time various places, you can also do that. The same goes for shopping. If you, say, are a Walmart loyalist, you can absolutely drive up to the Woodsville Walmart and do so. There's a Hannaford's in Bradford. There's a Shaw's in Woodsville. But you can also, I'm a former culinarian. I love to go and find good products to cook with. That is something, if you're passionate for food, there are some of the best products up this way. You just do have to go between a few towns and a few farm stands to make a meal.
but once you know where to go, I would agree.
I can give a few of those if anyone ever wants to know, but we keep some of that local stuff secret just for the sake of not lambasting some of our good small businesses.
Exactly. Well, listen, you may know, because you're in the business, that there is a bit of, some people characterize as a housing crisis. At least half of us believe it's a crisis.
I agree.
And I'm going to guess on your side of the mountains, it's a very similar situation. Yep. What, I to either commiserate or refute something. So recently there was an article in the Rutland Herald, also the Barrie newspaper, Barrie, Vermont, where our respective mayors, Mayor Luzone from Barrie and Mike Donges of my home city, Rutland. And essentially, they were saying, look, there needs to be a balance created between the interests of the landlords and the interests of tenants, and that's part of the problem. And then a whole host of people from a variety of membership in the housing ecosystem of Vermont weighed in further, everybody having a different side, essentially, that that they were siding with. So I'd like a fellow houser from an entirely different part of the state to sort of weigh in on the idea there and see what you think as far as the balance between tenancy and the housers that
and landlordship.
Most people, small scale landlords, right? Most people that rent in the state of Vermont, the average landlord has 1.7 units, right? So we're talking about more than 80% of these people are our neighbors. Yep. They are an owner occupied if it's 1.7, right?
Yep. It is a housing crisis, and I do fully agree that there needs to be some balance between the landlords and the tenants, only because I have been witness to many a landlord be made a victim, and it turns people off from doing things. An unfortunate nature of this part of the country is we tend to be rather reactionary. You see that in paperwork in Vermont with a real estate practice. We have a smoke form because a family passed away. We have a flood form because of historic flooding. We tend to be reactionary in nature, so unfortunately, we're not usually getting ahead of these things. I think we're now playing catch up in a major way because I have been fortunate to be involved in a few situations where landlords were given what I would call justice, where there was a situation where maybe a specific situation I was witness to where somebody had given up their apartment to somebody who was performing illegal acts from it after they had vacated it. And it was during the pandemic, and the landlord had to bring in a number of tenants in the building to essentially verify the happenings to make sure that we were all then being protected in our safety and our health and such. And that ended up working out favorably for the landlord, and I would say for the tenants as well. But it's one of the few situations where I have actually seen a landlord and tenant benefit from the same happenstance. One tenant obviously did not benefit, but that tenant was long gone. I think that the biggest thing I would advocate for is that there are unfortunately people that have found that you can almost exist as a professional victim, and it turns people off from being landlords because they're afraid of engaging with this party who gave them some very sweet, empathic, emotional story, and oh, they won my heart, and oh, this sweet I'm so lucky I found this person. And then unfortunately the thing that is awful to ring true is that if it's too good to be true, it often is, and then that person ends up really can end up ruining somebody's life if they really don't have the financial backing to be a bolstered landlord, as I would call it.
Yeah, we're not exactly in a market where you have a lot of large, REITs.
No, not here.
I mean, when I say it's our neighbors, I mean, I literally mean most of our landlords are small scale landlords, and they're mostly owner occupied, or they might have 2 or 3 properties. So if you've got even one bad tenant out of 6 units, as an example, it's your net margin. It might put you out of business.
Well, and with the rents the way they are, I will say we suffer from high rates, but that's also because of scarcity. The other damnation of a high rate is that that's a huge loss when you lose one, if not multiple, in, God forbid, a few buildings. I mean, it does happen that way too, with the way people are occupying real estate and the way that people are moving and shifting. And the Carolinas tend to be where people go from here, which is kind of funny, but they like to get away to the warmer and they like to get away to the metro, which I understand fully. We've had people go and come back, and we get to hear their stories, and it's interesting to hear their perspective as to why they would leave a region and then return.
Yeah, and it talked a little bit off air earlier. We were talking about a lot of the deferred maintenance. I often refer to it with friends. There's several key areas in the ecosystem of housing where you have stasis, right? So you've got older folks that maybe would have retired and downsized 10, 15, 20 years ago, but haven't been able to, right? And their retirement savings were never recovered from 2008. And so they're kind of faced with, and then of course, lastly, there's no inventory for them to downsize into.
Right.
And a lot of these people end up, there's so much deferred maintenance on the house that it's a race against time because they really can't sell it because it's decreasing in value faster than they can get something out of it. So talk a little bit about deferred maintenance and how that plays a role in the local market there.
Absolutely. So when I'm speaking with sellers, as I'm primarily functioning as a real estate broker, I'm always encouraging when I see a property that has been well maintained, how great that is, because it's not something that you can go back and change once it's already happened. So the hardest part of deferred maintenance in this part of the country is that Mother Nature desperately wants her properties back and takes them back very quickly. And we have a lot of secondary ownership up here. So what can also happen is there could be long windows of time where somebody doesn't view a property, and there can be an issue that is either, I'll use the term malignant, but being generous with that term, something just under the surface that you just really can't see or understand the full depth of, that then turns into a much larger issue once it becomes visible or somebody returns. I am always forward thinking with maintenance. I'm thinking about what I should be doing to keep everything at a neutral standard all the time, not really compromising on much of that. I incur more cost up front, but it's really the way to approach things, because if you do it right the first time, then you don't have to go back and double check and triple check and, hey, every month we look in this corner. It can get quite tedious if you're cutting corners.
So talking specifically to housers, right? If you've got a book of business and the deferred maintenance is really piling up and you don't know where to begin, is the best thing for them to do to sell off some properties, or help them, sort of prioritize?
Oh, absolutely. So you need to look at your position. If you're bleeding and it would benefit your position to lose a property or two, or maybe several, I would encourage it, because you cannot just lose everything and hope for some magical payday that will then, bring you back. Now, I am in a commission-based industry, so I will say I am fortunate to be in a line of work where I do get large disbursements at times. So I will say, as a houser, that doesn't hurt to have the maybe. And everything in my real estate work is a hypothetical income. It's all hopeful commissions on a little sticky note that I will easily lose because it's never a sure thing. As a houser, you have to have more stability. And if it means liquidating a few properties to give yourself a cash buffer, I would definitely encourage that. From there, I'd go from the roof down. Your roof is such an easy way to lose the rest of your house. So everything from roof, chimneys down, and I think of it very much how I was taught to clean kitchens, right? You start from the top, you work your way down, you clean your way through, and then things don't tend to gravitate upwards. Obviously, dust and other materials forgiven. So that's what I would also recommend is start from the top down, and ultimately down is also really important. And I'm referencing the basement. It's really important to get into the basement, make sure that your structure is breathing. It's not harboring a major moisture issue. You can lose an entire floor support system just to an unchecked moisture.
I don't know how it is over in your side of the state, but one thing I did notice here versus other parts of the country I've lived in for extended periods of time, I'm going through houses and like, it's pervasive, the amount of damage, long-term damage to foundations. Now, here historically, here being over close to the marble quarries and slate quarries, if you had it seems like if you had a problem with your fieldstone foundation, you just found some pretty fascia, either made out of white marble or blue or gray or red slate, and you covered the outside.
Yeah,
and it's like, so now you have multiple layers, which are really doing you no good. And the fieldstone is in serious disrepair. And so I don't know if that's like a Vermont thing or,
not happening this way, but what we see more is hydraulic pressure will eventually create some major rupturing. I've seen multiple properties this year, either in transactions or just in listing projects, where essentially you can find a position where the snow is accumulating and it's just freezing and thawing. And the way I was describing it to an associate today was each freeze and thaw is essentially a small blast. I mean, you can think of like every time that wall is taking a hit, and then ultimately it can compromise the entire structure above it, depending on what it's leveraging. So that's simple snow accumulation. I mean, things like just shoveling around your properties, just having somebody who cares to say like, hey, your snow's really piling up here. Maybe we change this, or, good thing this isn't on a foundation. Having people that are also in your camp that are looking out for you is super important. We discussed ecosystems off Mike, and it was really nice to hear that other people, or you specifically, use that approach, because that's how I look at my life and my business is I am fostering an ecosystem, and that ecosystem needs to sustain me too.
You have as to sustain you, and you can't, if you're winning and other people are losing, in other words, your winning is at their expense, it all comes crashing down eventually, right? So it's not that any of us are looking to win at the expense of our neighbors, which is harder to do, by the way, in a small town or a small city, because everyone knows everybody. But in all seriousness, if you can't find your way to that morally, economically, it's going to hit you, because sooner or later, there's no business to be had,
Oh, no, we need the local businesses too. I mean, as much as I support a large business like Walmart for employing a lot of our locals and our residents and giving them benefits that aren't offered by other companies, we still need commerce. We need the ecosystem to be sustained by our housing endeavors, which kind of has a bit, going back to the point of the article, I would agree things need to be brought back into balance so that it's a little less out of whack. I think that being a landlord, unfortunately, has become kind of like being car salesman, where it's like, that's not what I want to be when I grow up. I don't want to be some slumlord. And there are a lot of us that we do not embody any of the slumlord ideologies or practices, which I'm very proud to say, especially as a young person who didn't really have somebody that was, say, a landlording mentor. My real estate mentor was quite encouraging of pursuing this avenue, and he encouraged me to meet other top performers and do a lot of great things as a mentor should. And it's really something I've forged on my own, and I've been very cautious, but I was also very patient with my time in the real estate industry before I started. I didn't start my landlordship until I'd been in the business for about 4 years.
Interesting.
All and 50 transactions a year. Let's call it roughly 200 transactions under my belt is when I said, okay, I'm going to start acquiring properties, keeping them up, being responsible for them.
Was that partially because you wanted a vehicle by which to further invest some of the largesse that you might have started to make? And, because that can be a great,
oh yeah,
it's a great thing to invest in real estate. There's an art to it, right?
There's an old adage, you attract the things you don't want. And for many years I said, I'll never be a landlord. Never, I'll always just sell real estate. I'll always just, and I'll have a few properties and maybe vacation homes. But then what really happened was I've been very fortunate to be involved in a few people's retirement plans. And once I saw the opportunity that existed by working with someone to enact their departure from a sector, I completely abandoned the I'll never be a landlord ideology, because what I was fortunate to have was my mentor tap me to be his retirement plan for my real estate brokerage career. And then the owner of our office in Fairlee tapped me to basically say, hey, I'm going to slow down and I'd love for you to have this piece of real estate. And that gave me a great first investment, because it gave me my company as a tenant, which I'm very thankful for. And they are a great tenant. And I owe Buff McLaury, the gentleman that gave me that opportunity, a huge onus, similar to my mentor, Dale Bromley.
So I just want to check in with my future listeners here. Listen to what Darren is saying, right? Mentors, finding the right mentors, finding people who are well-tapped and experienced in their ecosystem, which it becomes a launch pad for you, right? Particularly for those of you who have not grown up. I'm a third generation builder and I've been a broker myself and blah, 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 blah. And even if you have that kind of experience, it's really great to have mentors that are your local connection to a market,
It's huge. And I'm a mentor now myself. I'm very happy to say I have an associate working with me under my brand at the company, and I'm very thankful to be able to pay it forward through a mentee. And it's really an important role to take. I don't know that if I could say anything to any future listeners, I would say that giving your time and paying things forward pay incredible dividends, and they will not pay them today, and they may not pay them tomorrow, but the amount of good fortune, goodwill, just good treatment I've received from just giving my time to some local organizations has been invaluable.
With fast-moving and sweeping changes to our economy in the works, we all need to reconsider how our investments are best placed. At Partners in Housing, we believe your money is best placed locally. Utilized to increase value and provide stable and desirable housing to your neighbors. Contact Partners in Housing to find out how you can participate in local housing opportunities by joining the Partners in Housing Fund. Look us up at partnersinhousingvt.com or email us at partnersinhousingvt@gmail.com.
And I would encourage volunteerism needs to come back in the fold just as bad as financial literacy, housers being, a respectable profession again, rather than being kind of unfortunately bundled together with slumlords. There's a lot that I would like to see rebalanced.
So we're going to get to culture in a minute and talk to that, what you're speaking of as far as, the generalities around being a slumlord and all that. First, I want to talk about policy, right? We were talking a little bit earlier about, the perspective of two of our mayors here in Vermont. And you also mentioned, the reactionary, we're very proactive about being reactive.
Yes.
We in Vermont, we feel like we need to respond. And I'm not on its face saying that this is a problem, right? It's good to want to respond to challenges. Where, from your perspective, can we improve policy from a policy standpoint statewide and get some of the housing built? And what kind of housing, in your estimation, needs to be built and for whom?
Yes. So policy-wise, I'm fortunate to participate in a Vermont Government Affairs Committee with VAR. So I do listen in and tune into what's going on. I think the unfortunate part that I'm hearing in a lot of those rooms is that there's a lot of frustration with how the policies are being brought forth, that they almost don't seem to be tackling the problem. And I don't want to pin any blame on anybody, because I don't know who exactly is writing these policies. But what I will say is that I do agree that, unfortunately, what I'm hearing is a lot of walls being thrown up, costs being increased. They're talking about implementing infrastructure that I don't know can be sustained by various municipalities, zoning admins having to do various inspections that technically one of the benefits of our region as a property owner, in my opinion, is the lack of municipal interference, because private property rights really ring true. And as a broker, in practice, I want for all of my people to have the strongest private property rights. So it would be, I guess, it goes back to balance. And Ultimately, I would hope that they would listen more to what the people and the housers are saying, because I think right now there's a lot of protest and not necessarily demonstration. I more mean we're hearing just a lot of folks saying, like, this is not the solution.
Do you think there's enough housers on key committees and in groups related to statewide office? I mean, I can only speak to my municipality. We've been advocating heavily to get even more housers, whether that be a landlord, a developer, et cetera, advocates on our planning commission, the DRB, on the redevelopment authority, because there's some on there, but there's some representation there. But there's a whole crop of particularly people who came to Vermont from afar, and we are completely not represented. In fact, it's been a lot of proactive preventing nominations to go through. And I just wonder if you think at the state level that there's a similar story, or do we need more representation, or what's the story there?
I think we need maybe more diverse representation. So to your question about what housing needs to be built, my first plan of attack is not what to build, it's what to fix up. As we can't interfere with people's private property rights, we have so much distressed and abandoned real estate between Vermont and New Hampshire. And there are towns that have tax sale policies, and they do go through with them, but they are few and far between, and they're far from what we need to add to the housing stock. What I would encourage is we need people to approach their families and friends and anyone around them that basically has real estate that they're not doing anything with, and they need to start doing something with it. Now, that something could be parting ways with it. It could be finding somebody that you know, like, or trust to engage with on a venture to maybe
unlock the stasis, right? We talked about
right, exactly, because that's where we really don't, in my opinion, need to build all that much more housing. We need more housing. There's no doubt in my mind. I'll say something that's maybe a little controversial, but it's one of my very few controversial points. I think that there's a perfect space in Bradford, Vermont for a large-scale apartment complex, and I think it'd be great.
I know that there is. I almost bought it 5 years ago.
Exactly. You know exactly what I'm talking about, and that is the perfect.
I think one of your peers is actually about to build on it.
I'm praying because honestly, there are places where that's appropriate, but then there are places like where I grew up. I grew up on a small residential dirt road. 5 or 10 acre zoning makes sense, but I do think there should be some implementation of maybe acre zoning for various smaller developments, because I think an acre lot is also all some people want. That's what we need, is to offer the inventory people.
You haven't said it. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you sound like a guy who's focused more on middle market housing, whatever that means, whether it's targeting a sector of the workforce but not luxury homes or second homes per se. We're talking about homes for Vermonters who are, actively employed and can afford something, right?
Yes.
And frankly, a mortgage would be a lot cheaper. So our partners in housing, one of our secondary targets is to provide, like, either on a subject to basis or some other legal basis, provide the down for people for whom they haven't been able to save the money for their down payment, but they're paying 3 to 4 times as much in rent.
Yeah.
And they've been doing it for like 10 years. So it's like, I'm pretty sure, not according to banks, mainstream banking, but I'm pretty sure they've proven they can afford a mortgage that would be $1,500 a month because they're paying $4,000 or $3,200 a month for rent.
That's a whole, yes, I am a middle housing person, but I will say that is because I work in the luxury sector in my brokerage business. Sotheby's International Realty is a phenomenal company and is a luxury real estate company. So I work with the high end, and I love that. That brings me to a high standard. I hold myself to a higher standard. I encourage all my peers, affiliate with great organizations. You'll hold yourself to a higher standard. But because of that, I also don't want to be the luxury housing guy. I'm from Newbury, Vermont. I want to be working with everybody. So that's where I look at my much more average approach to housing. But what you're also tapping into is a little bit of my whole, financial literacy kick and really trying to sustain communities and trying to bring people up to get. I think that there's a lot to be done, and there's a lot of opportunity to do it. We just need young people and people with initiative and people that care to do it. And they need to step up and be kind of guided as to how to do it, which is where there's a few good groups developing, like where you came and spoke. That Bradford Housing Group is a phenomenal one.
Yeah, the same aforementioned article in the paper this week, there's a strong suggestion in there for landlord education. which I would agree with. Now, what was missing from the article I found very interesting is tenant education. We're finding tenants who didn't realize until we helped them to realize, because in some cases it's the first time they've had stable housing. But they're gainfully employed, but they're like, yeah, the heat went off. Well, the heat went off because you didn't fill the tank, an oil tank or a propane tank. Well, who pays for that? Right. So let me ask you, some policy, but very at the detail level questions. So why does Vermont not have both a tenant and a landlord education program like states like Massachusetts does?
It honestly doesn't make much sense to me. And personally, I have been advocating lately, especially for heightened financial literacy and home care service classes in the most basic of high school programs, because it is not something that people should be stumbling into in their adulthood. We should be teaching people things like, hey, this propane line's not on unless the switch is in line. I'm not a propane professional, so anyone listening, please don't use that as a way to work on your...
I'm not telling you to blow up your house, people, okay?
But you can think that if something is perpendicular versus parallel, it does make sense that would kind of be off versus on, right? But again, if you don't know what you don't know. So I encourage people really expand their horizons, especially on the topic of home ownership. It's very important that somebody, before they get into home ownership, know that that's what they want to do and can do. The times we see properties turn around quick are not really usually positive ones. It's usually somebody who's like, hey, I bought this and now I can't handle it and it's too much and we now have to move. And it doesn't work out financially to just flip a property like that in the state of Vermont specifically either. There are penalties that, as far as fees at the state level. And so you have to be really careful about getting into home ownership, which is why I advocate that people can be lifelong tenants, and there should be an encouragement for people to consider being lifelong landlords as a form of employment or even just a passionate pastime.
Yeah. You've said a number of things that I still want to I'll go back and touch upon. The idea that, we have so many empty lots or underutilized homes, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know Orange County's numbers right now. Any numbers I know might be too old. Rutland County, I'll give you some numbers. Okay, 2,413. That's the number of abandoned properties in the county. A county of 60,000 people. In the city of Rutland, we don't officially have an inventory, I'm told. Although we have on record our relatively new planning director, Ed, and I spoke last week, and he said, well, it's more than 220 lots, a city of 15,000 people that are empty and available, or their properties still on lots that are, technically available because they're tax title. So it seems to me, and this is by the way, in a place that has town water and sewer, which is rare in our state. And it seems to me all of the latent property taxes we need, town to town and city to city, all of the housing we need this is kind of getting to your point. I want you to elaborate on it and emphasize it. Right. We're not talking about building condos for the ski resorts.
Oh, no. Goodness.
We're talking about, we have great opportunity here for middle market housing. Right. Any kind of housing, multifamily, single family, 2 to 4 unit on existing places where there once were buildings.
Yes, people don't want to live in condos in our region specifically is what I meant to say, because ultimately condos are a great offering elsewhere, and we actually see them as a nice offering down around the Dartmouth College area for students who say just want to be close to skiing but also want to have their own space and not be on campus.
It's a financial model that makes sense for that market, yeah.
Exactly. We see private property rights really be the desired outcome for any purchase up here. I want my space. I want to have my ability to do my thing. We have zoning town by town, but we ultimately see some people that gravitate towards the towns with no zoning. And that's it's a specific type of person, but at the same time, I understand it fully. I don't necessarily support gross municipal oversight. I think it's necessary in certain cases, but I think that as long as you keep things at a healthy norm, then you should be able to essentially kind of, do what you so choose, as long as it doesn't harm your neighbors or yourself.
Right. Yeah. And that it financially feasible, right? And it works with the environment and everything else. So let's sort of conclude our policy conversation here. What other things should we be doing? Should the state be doing that would get us to a better place as far as the housing. Vermont Futures Project says we need about 30,000 units. That's a state official number. If I add in, we've crunched a bunch of different scenarios last year, and it could be as high if you're thinking about growth, right? And you only think in areas where there's already infrastructure, or again, building on abandoned properties. We're thinking it's more like 75,000. That's adding in a lot of replacement, because we're more than 75%. Houses made before 1940.
Yeah, I would say.
How do we get there?
We've recently received a mandate in our region that we need to provide some 180 housing units by the end of a 5-year run. And in our little township of Newberry and Wells River, a lot of folks are quite concerned about this goal being set for us. And we actually have a housing.
Wait, that's a municipal goal or a region?
It's from Two Rivers Ottaquechee. I don't want to overspeak because I don't engage with them.
No, but I'm saying it's for your town.
There's
or region.
Two Rivers Ottaquechee has said that the township of Newberry, Vermont, which includes the district of Wells River, Vermont, should have an additional 180 housing units by the end of a 5-year window, essentially giving us a future mandate for what our housing development needs to look like. And so we have a housing forum upcoming where we're going to actually partner around Town Recycling Day, which is very strategic. So we can get people in to basically give their thoughts on this scenario, because what it is inspiring is the conversation that I just said that listeners should have with their peers. Is we need people to tell us where we could possibly come up with these housing units. I mean, Newberry, Vermont and Wells River, Vermont as a town and its district are a very small area.
Yeah.
100 housing units is very far-fetched from our current standpoint, which would be maybe a few housing units developed per year. And that's a big maybe. I mean, you'll see the improvements on apartments, and you'll see that somebody maybe broke off a wing and now it's apartments. And that's where you'll see more like ADU classification. And the towns are really encouraging ADUs left and right, which is a great thing. But I think that unfortunately, a lot of people don't really understand them. So we're still running around the knowledge implementation.
Well, and financing them. What would happen if VHIP was a revolving loan fund in the traditional sense, as opposed to a reimbursement? What do you think that would do?
It'd be huge. I mean, what we need is we need to open the door for financing in creative manners, and we need to give opportunity to people who want to do something. That's the hardest part of my position, especially with the climb that I've had. I've gone from owning one single family home to officially owning 5 properties currently, and we're working on the next 4 actively. And it took a lot of effort and a lot of working the right way and with the right people and doing pretty specific things. We need to open the door. We need to open the door fully, not just to somebody who, say, like as a real estate broker, I was fortunate to have the ability to, work with properties and ultimately improve upon them without having to rely on financing all the time. I did reimburse myself in one project, which was quite nice, but that's not everybody's ability. Yeah, not so has a local bank. Shout out to Wells River Savings Bank for being a phenomenal partner with all of my projects thus far. And that's something that we don't have out of Wells River. There might be other small banks. There's another great institution, Claremont Savings Bank. They are a phenomenal institution, but that's, Claremont area. They're covering a different territory, even though they'll come into our region. So we need more of these small institutions that are willing to support a local entrepreneur. But then I would say we need big resources too. There's rumblings of a development corp coming into our region that I'm working with these rumblings. And that's something I'm really advocating for. Grants are scary, in my opinion, unfortunately. But that's why we're fully self-funded. Grant funds, unfortunately, there are ways that they can come back to harm you if you don't handle them appropriately. So what a development corp that I would see having the highest function in our region would be is actually someone where you could go to them and say, hey, here's a property. Here's some money to evaluate said property and its grant potential. Tell me what I can do, manage these grants, get me across the finish line, and make sure I'm not penalized. And unfortunately, it's something that we want to avoid, especially with how much risk we're taking in other categories.
Yeah, it feels like there's a lot of, I guess what I might call donut holes built into the system, right? Banking is tough to come by. That's why people aren't building more ADUs. So why is VHIP a reimbursement, right? Like, that's great. Okay, it's a step. Right. And we use VHIP ourselves and we've had success with it. However, for people that can't get the banking in the first place, or they don't have investors in the first place, or, some other source or themselves, I feel like, well, that's, it's almost like we want to say we have a program, but we designed it to not go all the way. We're 90% of the way exactly where it needs to be, targeting the problem. Right. And so it's kind of like, so take us back, by the way, in conclusion, because this has been a great conversation. Day one, you're transitioning from just being a broker to being a full-on houser. What was your financial stack? Was it all started with your own money plus friends and family? How did you go to a bank? Talk to our other housers that I know are going to listen, and how did they get started?
I am a unique case. I am an incredibly fortunate beneficiary of owner financing. I was able to have multiple parties hold paper. I still actively have parties hold paper, and it is a mutually beneficial arrangement, and it must be. And what really helps with the overall cost of things is not having to incur something like a loan origination fee. I love my lenders. I love my lending partners. I have nothing against you folks getting paid the way you have to get paid. However, I will say when you're really getting down to the nitty gritty of housing development, it's every dollar counts. And so I was self-funded. I will say I was self-funded for all of my projects. I have not had any angel investors or any cash outside of myself. I am very fortunate to have a loving spouse who also allows me to really do as is needed with the real estate projects. So I am very, very fortunate to be able to make a lot of executive calls without having to say, ring up the bank at home. And from there too, I'm very fortunate to be in a relationship where we're always building upon what we have in each other, and she's a doctorate candidate, and it's really a big thing to be working on this while she's working on that, because then she'll be a local pharmacist, I'll be a local houser. We really love these communities that we're in and around us, and we want to be a ingrained part of them for the long haul. But what I did was I built up a bank with my real estate brokerage work. I saved. I was diligent. I got very fortunate that I fell into the service Acorns in college, which is essentially one of the first Roundup apps. So I started learning about investing early. And then my mentor was very wise when I started in this business after 13 years in hospitality. I switched to a much different line of work. He encouraged I start following the financial markets. And I didn't want to punitively just watch, so I paid to play. And I got pretty lucky that I just bet on Mag 7 blue chip stocks, and I got to ride some rides and see how favorable markets work. And then lately I've definitely struck it out on my own a little bit more, and I've not, it's not gambling for me, so I've not learned any hard lessons, but I've definitely learned that there are different approaches. And lately what I'm doing is mostly a dividend income structure because I like the supplementary income to my rental income.
Excellent. Last question for you.
Yes.
Did you see over the weekend that the Fed bailed out regional banks nationwide to the tune of $8.35 billion?
Yes.
And all targeted towards mortgage securities that are poorly performing. Is it the beginning of the end?
I don't think so. The thing I will say is 2008 does not simply be able to 2008 is simply not able to happen again, in my opinion, based on how many hoops and hurdles you have to go through to get financing as a buyer nowadays. There are no realities where you're getting a ninja, no income, no job. You're not getting any of these back office kind of products as seemingly structured that collapse. I think unfortunately what we're seeing is the student loans have been priced back into people's budgets. And what happened, from what some of my financial industry friends have been talking about, is there were $0 student loan situations across the board during the pandemic window, which now are coming back into play. And say you have a pretty substantial student debt, that's going to impact your debt to income ratio. But then also, if you're already in the house, it's going to impact your total picture, just as how you work with your income. And if you're not on an income schedule where you have fluctuations up and down and say large disbursements, that can really hurt. And that's where I think it's coming. It's other parts of the country, not here. We are very fortunate to be insulated here. I will say it comes here eventually, but I think by the time it gets here, it's usually had a chance to die down some. Very similar to the hurricanes. We usually get the tailwinds.
Darren Sherburne is, once again, affiliated with Four Seasons Sotheby's International Realty. He is the associate broker of the Fairlee office. He's a houser, and we're really glad that you came on the show today to speak with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com. Driven by data. Driven by technology. Driven by community development. Driven by the need to get results for your project. SM Graves Associates. Delivering real estate development to you, including project management and pre-development services with a keen focus on delivering community-oriented projects. We build profitable projects that respond to the needs of your neighborhood. Join the SMG family. Find us at smgravesassociates.com.